Welcome to Behind the Doors, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of residential real estate investing. I'm your host, Dan Noma Jr., here with my co-host, Marvin Cruz.
We're here to help you unlock the best strategies and practice for investors. Whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned pro looking to scale your portfolio.
We've spent decades navigating the ever-changing world of real estate, and now we're sharing everything we've learned to help you succeed.
From off-market deals to cash flow management and everything in between, we'll break it down and bring you actionable insights that can make a real difference in your investments.
So get ready to open the door to new opportunities and take your real estate investing to the next level. Let's dive in.
You know what, buddy? I actually watch a lot of HGTV.
Really?
Quite a bit. You can flip a house in 30 minutes.
I would have lost that bet.
But then you try to do this, and it's not in 30 minutes. But,
No, yeah.
When you think about strategies, and I'm getting somewhere with HGTV, and this is not a plug for HGTV by any means. But, the fix and flip, that's the sexy one to me. This is just my own opinion. I buy a property at X, I flip it, I sell it at X. But then there's something that's also entertaining about buying a property and renting it out, right? And holding it or Airbnb in it because I can see the long-term future. Is there a big deal? Is there a big difference? What's the difference there? What are some pros and cons that we can tell the audience about?
And that is a big difference. That is a big difference. I think, so I guess is the question, how does someone make the decision between flip and buy and hold?
Yeah, exactly. What should be my strategy if I'm coming into this blind? Because all I hear is real estate made the most millionaires. So I know I got this money.
Yeah.
I want to do something.
Yeah.
But flip may be, what's the word? Intimidating, if you will.
Yeah.
Because you could tear down a wall and find out there's all kind of other problems you didn't even consider.
Yeah.
Right? Or long-term rental, which actually may need some kind of flipping or some kind of upgrades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of, I think there's two schools of thought really on both, right? That you can think about, and I think one thing that kind of gets missed when people think about this is they think they have to pick one, like you don't have to just be one or the other. You can be, in the right cycle, the market cycle, it's really good to be a flipper. And then in other cycles, it's really good to be somebody that's buying and holding.
So let's
Flipping.
go there. That was good. Let's start with flips.
Yeah.
What are some of the pros to flipping?
Yeah. I would say the biggest pro is probably the quick profits, right? Like you invest $100,000 today, you return $135,000, right? Like you can turn the dollar really quickly. You realize the gain faster.
Yep.
And so I think that's always been a good barometer. Like, and that's what makes it attractive, right? Because if you got to make a quick buck, you want to go buy a new car and you can flip a house and buy a new car easily. That can be done, no problem.
Yep.
Right. And then, the people that are professional flippers, what they're doing is like their money is very active, right? So they're actively taking that money and they're growing the volume of flips that they can do.
Yeah.
So it's like one flip can lead to two flips can lead to four can lead to six, like you can use the money very, very quickly and it's very active and fluid, compared to like a rental.
Yeah.
Your access to the capital is much, much quicker and easier, so I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
And it happens so fast, like it doesn't seem like it's fast when you're doing them. Have you ever flipped one?
I've never flipped.
Oh my God. Yeah. So when when you're doing it, it feels like it's moving at like snail speed, right? Like, the demo day one, like that's like my favorite day is demo day is when like you go to the house, you bought the house on a Tuesday, by Thursday, the house is demoed out and it's like a clean slate. It's like ready to go. All the nasty tiles taken out, the countertops are gone, cabinets are gone, all the flooring is removed, carpets are in the dumpster's full. Like that day is awesome.
Right,
That is such an awesome day. But then it's like, that is the easiest day because you're just tearing it out. Now putting it back together just moves so slow. It is such a slow feeling process. But while you're in it, you know, but then you look at it on the outside and compare it to the other strategies, it's so much faster, right? Like in order to see your return and rental, you got to wait some time to see the return. You know, you're going to get some cash flow every month or every year, however you want to quantify it. You can look at it that way, but that's not the big game. That's not the big win, right? The big win comes way later. And whereas in flipping, you're going to get that dollar back right away, you know, but you know, that also can be a con, right? That can also be a problem, right? But I think the good news with that though is you have less exposure to like declining markets, you know. So if a property, you buy it today, you flip it in 90 days, you put it back on the market. Markets don't tend to move in 30 days, right? They don't tend to move in 60. They really don't even tend to move in 90. You know, I think that you really start to see market movement in like 6-month chunks. We've seen it, you know, we've seen home price appreciation go up. We've seen it go down, right? But it's not typical. It takes a little while for the market to adjust and people to get used to that.
No, that makes sense. Total makes sense. Talk to me about the cons. What are some of the downsides to flipping? Because I tell you, I watch these shows and they always knock a wall down and it's like a big surprise. And then they go to commercial. Right. Then you come back and then they make that phone call. Yeah. You won't believe this. Right. Yeah. You won't believe this.
It's a high risk game, right? Like anything that you can make fast money at doesn't matter what it is, right? Like anything that you do that in, it comes with risk, right? That's why you get a big return if you do this. You just get a big risk. So I think there's two kinds of risk, right? One is like financial risk, right? So it's just like I bought the property at X price and I thought I was going to sell it at Y price and I thought my renovation was going to be at this number. And the reality is it's not worth what I thought it was going to be, right? And there's so many factors that play into that. It's like, you know, you can't just like point to one. It's never just market condition, right? What I've seen it, you know, on the other side where people like are upside down on a flip, right? And that's like the worst feeling ever. If you're upside down in an investment property, you're going to lose money on it. It's terrible. A lot of times it's not because of market condition. It's because of like bad information on the way in or they did the renovation, but they did it not very good, right? They skimped out on some stuff on the renovation. And those properties tend to not sell. It's like everybody can see through that now, you know, and to your point, like an HGTV's probably ruined that market for those that did like cheap or cheesy remodels because you can't get away with it anymore. Like it's like everybody can see it a mile away. They're like, oh, I see those cabinets at Home Depot. Those are the cheap ones. Those are no good, right? Like, and that just becomes the stigma of the asset. And it sits there. So the risk is like super high. It's just, you know, or like physical risk, right? The other, you know, financial risk one, physical is the other one. You know, like I bought a property with under the assumption that the AC unit was good 100 times, at least 100 times. Where like the seller told me the unit was good. I went out and inspected it. The day of inspection, the unit was good. We did the renovation on the property. We go to, you know, paint the property, turn the AC unit back on, and it doesn't work.
Right.
And I didn't account for that. So that stuff happens, whether it's it's plumbing. Like plumbing's a big one, especially if you're flipping like those 70 build kind of properties. The sewer lines fail at some point. It's like stuff we don't even think about. It's under the ground. It's not, we can't see it. I can't see the sewer line by looking at the house. Everything looks good. AC unit's good. Roof is good. Pool looks pretty good. It just is dated or whatever. And then you find out the sewer line is bad. Like, how are you supposed to figure that out? You know? So
what do you do? How do you offset some of that?
Oh man.
What are you considering when you're flipping? Just to protect yourself. Because you came into this, obviously you should come in with I need to have a minimum profit of X, 10,000, 50,000, even 100,000. But to protect myself, where do I put that that math? Is that my renovation? Is that my my rehab time? Or where would you put to offset some of that risk?
The way that I like to underwrite them is I like to add like about a 10%, deviation or 10% buffer in all my models, right?
Yeah,
so whether it's the price of the property on the way out is worth 10% less, my renovation went 10% over. And when I look at a deal, I go, okay, worst case scenario, if both of those things happen, do I still make money? Yes. Okay, cool. Then that's a deal. But I won't buy a property if the margin's just too thin, and so if you're chasing deals just to buy, right? To buy because it looks good on the surface and you're not doing your research and actually underwriting and evaluating the property appropriately, you can get in all kinds of trouble with that. Like that just becomes like super, super difficult to deal with. On the physical side, I think hiring the right contractor, right? And actually hiring somebody that knows what to look for. Like the contractors that I work with, when I send them out to look at a property or do a pre-inspection, I have them do it in my due diligence period. Like I'm never a buyer that has to buy a property with no due diligence. It happens. I see guys do it and they do great with them. That layer of risk doesn't interest me, So, I've done short inspection periods, a day or two, or even like had my guys look at the property prior to and then made an offer on it, stuff like that. But I won't buy a property if I can't inspect it, and that part of it it happens. I see people do it and some of them do great, right? But that's where the horror stories come is like, you just didn't inspect it appropriately, I was on the phone this week with an investor client of mine, and he bought a property in North Scottsdale to live in. It's his primary residence. So it wasn't investment. This was his primary residence. He gets the seller property disclosures, right? And in the disclosures, there's no mention of any sewer problems. Every time he goes to the property, he's never had a inkling of a sewer issue. It's a very high-end home, And, they had done some like repairs in the attic and like they had disclosed some other things. But then, so he and his wife sell their house, they move into this new property. And he was calling me to ask me questions about like if I knew a real estate attorney about, failure to disclose. And what he learned is that this property has a sewer gas problem. So the sewer gas, for some reason where he is, backs up into the property. So, the house, like sewer gas smells terrible.
Right.
Their house smells like sewer gas. It's unbearable. They're living in a hotel right now because of how bad the smell is. And there are ways to mitigate it, right? They have fans, they have all kinds of different things. And apparently the seller told the roofer not to repair these fans or put these vents in and do all these things that would have mitigated the problem. He advised her that she should as a result of the problem. She's like, no, I'm selling it. I just want to get rid of it. And didn't disclose it. And now my poor guy is stuck with this sewer gas problem, right? But, what I said to him is, I said, well, what about the inspection? Did anything come up in the inspection? He's like, well, no. Did you have a formal home inspection? No. Right? The guy buys so many houses that he just thought he could get away without it.
Yeah.
And he never went in the attic because he closed on the property in August. So, had he gone in the attic, a home inspector would have clearly noticed this and then it would have never been a problem. Yeah. But now he's stuck with it. I've bought properties too where I bought one that had, in the backyard, we were fixing the landscaping in the backyard and we came upon a door, a trap door. And we go open the door and it's some that looks to be almost like a mine shaft in the backyard, right? It's a very old shaft, of some sort, almost like a fallout shelter in the backyard. And, we stop, of course, and it ended up costing us quite a bit of money to go, we had to go research it with the city and see what the heck it was. And Then we had to fill it in and make sure that it was like safe and sound, and otherwise, and then I had to disclose it on the way out that, hey, in the backyard, we found this giant thing. It's like so many things can come up, right? That you just don't predict or see, that I think, like, you as a flipper are taking a high risk, you're playing a high risk game, and you got to just be willing to take the risk. And, some do have the ability to take the risk and other ones don't, and I think there's a world for everybody, but the bigger return deals happen to come from the higher risk deals too. The two are synonymous.
Yeah. So, in closing on that, and then we'll definitely get into this long term. So high risk, high reward. This is just Vegas concept, if you will. The more money you play, the more money you can win.
Yeah.
But the unknowns are there. And not to mention, are you a contractor yourself?
Yeah.
So you just bought a property, and now you have to actually go install some new stuff. Yeah. And that's a whole nother nightmare. It's just too much unknown for me personally.
Yeah.
But I think it still leads back to your model to protect yourself. I love what you said about buffering 10% on every single calculation, because there's some unknown in there.
Yeah.
If the deal is too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true.
Yeah,
there's a reason. So
the purple sky scenario is
exactly.
what I'd like to call that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think as a flipper too, I mean, you're actively having to manage the asset all the time too, right? So some people think when they're going to flip a house that it's going to be easy. That they can do it on the weekends and evenings when after work.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can.
Yeah.
I think that if you had the right contractor and you had everything go right, you could do that.
Yeah.
But more times than not, it requires like supervision.
Yeah.
It requires active management. And then I guess maybe close out on all the cons with flipping, and it's a good business. So, like, don't get me wrong, I'm just giving you the cons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is like, you also have to find your next deal constantly. As you start a project, you may as well start looking for your next one. Because it takes a little while to find the right deals. And it can be competitive.
Yeah.
So because of that, like, you're constantly looking for your next income stream.
Yep.
If that's what you do professionally, it can be, it can be feast or famine sometimes on opportunities that come about. And that can be a little bit hairy at times too.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that insight. And I would close with that as well, because I've also seen from my lens when I'm talking to these investors, my favorite conversation when I'm talking to a flip is, do you consider renovation time? And do you consider marketing time? And do you consider closing time? So basically, you actually own that home a lot longer than you think.
Yeah.
And what comes with that is the fees, the utilities, even home association fees.
Right.
And by the way, every renovation I've done, whether it's installing a patio, never goes on time. I can't tell you how many stories of even just simple putting a pool in.
Yeah.
They will come dig the hole like immediately.
Right.
And then they're gone. But you got a big old hole. So I'm telling this story because flippers, it's not going to go on time. So budget and be prepared for those long renovation, and things can go wrong. So
at least know, right?
Yeah,
at least
know.
At least look at the model and go, hey, this is my best case. This is potentially my worst case scenario. And at least now I can sleep at night knowing that I've got the data and I've got the information. And I think that's helpful.
All right. Still a good model, nonetheless. But let's switch to long term. And long term could actually be, you're just going to rent it out, 18-month lease concept, or even a long term could be short term rental, your Airbnb concepts. Talk to us about the pros for the long term investor.
Long term, is definitely more in my lane. What I love about long term, and I think the pros that investors should consider if they're looking at both, is that long term allows you to make money while you're sleeping. Right.
Yep.
And like every kind of like wealth building book or any class I've ever been to about wealth building or any of that, it's always like a trick to try to figure out how you can make money when your labor's not in it. Right. When you're not like actively working on the clock and you can make money, that's that passive income, that passive wealth. And that's where like a lot of the wealth in the country has come from, right? Is that they've made their money passively,
Right.
investing in the right stuff and doing the right things that have helped them, invest. And so I love the long-term, regardless of like short-term pad split, room rental or just a regular rental.
Right.
Just in the fact that you can create passive income, it just is the difference between that and flipping. There's no passive income with flipping. I mean, the only people making passive income on the flipping side are the ones that are lending hard money. Those are the only ones that are doing that. And even that can be stressful.
Yeah.
Like that still has some layers of stress. But with the long term, you're not playing a short game. You're playing a long game, right? Like, you can't get into a rental and think you're going to sell it in 2 years. Like that just isn't realistic.
Right.
The game that you're really playing, like the fundamental game that you're playing, is that appreciation game, right? You're playing this game, whereas like, okay, my tenant is going to rent the property for $1,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
My mortgage payment's $700 a month. I'm netting $300 a month, and the home price is appreciating by 4% a year.
Right. Right.
Like if those are the fundamentals of your market and you can do that, that's great, because now what's happening is on your 15-year mortgage that you've got on that asset, the tenant is paying your mortgage off,
Right.
which is huge, right? Like, so in 15 years, you're going to own the property free and clear. You can either sell it then and get your big payday, or you can continue to rent it, and that just becomes income, right? There's no more mortgage payment. It just becomes income, but you didn't pay it off. All you did was maybe make the down payment. And that I think is awesome. Like, I just think that that's like the coolest thing. If you can do that as anybody, just to create that passive income when you're older or retired or whatever, and have, can you imagine if you had like a portfolio of like, there's guys in town here that have like 200 assets. So if you had 200 rental properties all scheduled to be paid off by the time you're 45, 55 years old, I mean, you're at the end of that, right? Even if those properties rent for $2,000 a month per property, you're making like $100 and something thousand a month.
You are winning.
At the end of the day,
You are winning.
That's awesome, later on.
Yeah. And then talk about, there's obviously tax benefits there, right? And then obviously, yeah.
Yeah. You can, with a rental property, you can depreciate the asset, and that means that you're writing off the value of that asset every year, and you can do that. That helps people save a ton of money on their income tax. So if you're in a high income tax bracket, you've got a great job, great salary, you've got to look for ways to try to, save some money on your income tax. And that, depreciation is awesome. You can also start thinking about like the renovations of the asset. So, as the property value is going up, to your point earlier, you're continuing to invest in that asset. It's not like it's a one-time renovation, right? You renovate it the first time, but every time a tenant moves out, you've got to go back into it and turn it.
Right.
And, maybe paint it, put new carpet in, and keep it kind of up to date. All of those expenses become tax deductible as well, right? So, that all becomes tax deductible. So here you are like improving your property over time too, and you get to do it without having to pay tax on it. It becomes tax deductible, which is great.
That is
so
awesome.
like that's.
What are some of the cons on long term?
Well, I think probably the biggest one and probably the biggest barrier of entry for people into it is the fact that like their money's tied up for a long time. Like your money is going to be tied up for a while. It's not a game that you can play, like I said, for 2 years or 2 months in a flip game or anything like that. So if liquidity matters and like you've got to have access to the cash, that can be tough, and so, you've got to make sure that you've got, the capital, whatever your down payment is, or, whatever money you're going to invest in, that is money that you don't want or need back in, a 5, 10, 15 year period. Like
playing the long game.
You have to be committed to the long game, and so your money's going to be tied up. So that's a big one. The other one is just tenant horror stories, right? I mean, there's a whole, I mean, I think there's more HGTV shows on those too, right? Like tenants that the
don't pay and then don't leave.
Oh my God. Yeah. Right.
So they say, what do they call that?
Right.
What is that?
Squatters.
Squatters. That's it. Yeah, exactly. And that's tough.
Oh my God.
And guess what? When you owe that mortgage, they're not going to care.
No.
You still got to pay the mortgage.
Right.
So yeah, those are just nightmares.
So yeah, I mean, you've got a tenant, you're dealing with maybe a property manager, and hopefully you got a good property manager. But property management can be dicey. Someone else is dealing with your income. They're taking that money, they take a little cut off the top, and then they pass it back to you. I mean, I use them. I think that they're great. You just got to find the right ones and, make sure that they're doing the job of like vetting that tenant out in advance. I was actually having a conversation today with an agent, and we were talking about tenants, and he was asking me, how do you vet a tenant? And I said, well, you don't. I think every tenant relationship you get into carries risks. Like some of the worst tenants I've had are the people that I've met where they go, oh my God, I've never made a late payment in my life. I'm never going to pay you late. I've got this great job. I do this and this. Like, we're so clean, upfront, honest, whatever. And then 2 months later, they're behind in their rent payment. Like, it's almost like a red flag for me at this point. If they oversell themselves when I hand them the keys, I'm usually
here it comes.
I'll see you in 90 days. Like, I know you're not going to make the rental payments. And I guess the other thing would be, besides tenants damaging the property or not paying rent,
not treating it like their own,
is really just like the market cycling, right? Because it's hard to play the long game when you see your property value going down, and so holding properties when the market is going in a direction that you don't like isn't favorable. But that's not the game you're playing. And I think that's what people have to remember is like, you've got to just kind of put the blinders on at that point. If the property is still cash flow positive, right? Or break even at least, it's worth holding, because in time, someone else is going to pay your mortgage off and you're going to own the asset free and clear. And so, dealing with the insomnia of market cycles can also be a challenge in owning long-term rentals.
Yep.
What
about, I just recently moved from Texas, and a couple of things that people don't factor in is extremely high taxes.
Yeah.
And so I own this long-term rental. I'm renting it out at X.
Yeah.
But guess what? Tax spikes.
Yeah.
And it can spike. And I'm telling you, it can spike 10X, 2X, 3X, 4X relatively quickly.
Yep.
So that's a huge con from my perspective, right?
Yeah,
so
you've got to, when you underwrite the property day one, it looks like day one, right? That's it. But I think the thing you've got to do as a good landlord or long-term owner is that you've got to evaluate that property consistently, right? So I'm looking at my properties every 6 months, and I'm doing exactly that, right? I'm trying to determine, what that value is today, right? And what is my risk, right? Am I still in that same position, or is that position starting to get threatened? Right? We're seeing that in Texas, Florida, two different reasons. Texas is taxes. Florida, it's property insurance, right? Their property insurance has gone up like 300% in some areas. So it's changed that market significantly, because, a lot of those people that were banking on bought it at X thinking like, okay, cash flow is great. All of a sudden the property taxes or the insurance rate goes up and goes crazy. They're now stuck with this asset that, isn't cash flow positive every month. And then you got to make a decision and go, okay, do I want to feed it every month? And I've got some like that too. I feed because I believe in the appreciation of it long-term versus the cash flow today. I'm less interested in that. And I feel like the $300 or whatever that I'm putting into the property every month is worth putting it there. It's almost like a savings account. Because now I'm still going to pay that asset off at the end of the day. And I'm going to have this portfolio of assets that just yield cash when I'm older.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So you're playing the long game, which is amazing, right? You get a 15-year mortgage and let someone else pay for it, and then you reap the benefits at the end. That is amazing. How do they offset, very similar to how we talked about flipping, how do we offset some of this risk that we're talking about for long term?
Yeah, data. So data can be more important in long term. I mean, it's important in both, but it's so critical in the long term game. Like, you've got to have good data going in.
Yep.
And then you got to have consistently good data to keep tabs on the asset throughout the process.
Yep.
You can't just buy one and then not keep up to date with it. You've got to stay up to date with the trends. I can't tell you how many times like someone has come into the office with a rental portfolio or a couple of assets, and their rental price is like $400 or $500 below current market value. Right. And when we tell them that, they go, oh, well, the tenant's been in there for
like
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And, I do okay on it and I perform. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great, but I can't, like, if you need to sell that asset and you've got a tenant in place at a below market rent, you've just lowered your property value. So all that equity that we're talking about, you just sucked it up because you're under market on your rents. So it's like, you got to have that purple sky scenario in your mind and go, okay, like, if I had to sell the asset with the tenant in place, would it still be worth this number? Yeah. And that, I think, gets missed a lot of times when people get stuck in this idea that like, oh, my tenant's great and I just want to keep them in there. Some of that's fine, but it's only fine to a certain degree. You've got to make sure that your property value is performing. It has to perform. You just got to have an asset that performs.
Yeah, I think this is huge, what you're hitting on for long-term investors. Data, because you got to have data to buy the right asset. But then what are you going to charge for rent, right? Whether it's monthly in the long-term situation, but Airbnb, whether it's seasonal. We live here in Scottsdale. Again, we talked about this in a few podcasts ago. Everything's much cheaper in the summer. But are you factoring in those costs, right? Are you factoring in property management? And what do they charge you? Are you factoring in repair and maintenance, right, for every year? Are there other debts that you're not considering?
Vacancy is the
one,
best one.
Yeah.
I mean, I see people all the time go, they think that their property is going to rent consistently for 12 months out of the year. And I go, well, if your tenant moves out in, January, then you're not going to get a new tenant until February at the earliest, right? So you're going to have a vacancy period of at least 1 month. You might have a vacancy period of 2 months, right? If that, the tenant gives you the deposit, doesn't move in for a month, stuff like that. Like, you've got to have all of that stuff factored in, right? And so if you're not tracking vacancy rates in your area, that's another big one. That's a big miss, right? Where that could be the difference between being cash flow positive and not. And if you're not ready for those curveballs, you could be in a really tough spot, on some of those.
And I think also you mentioned someone's charging $500 less, right? You got to also look at other demographics. Affordability, like what are people able to afford in that area? Did you consider that before you made a decision on what to charge per month or per season?
How you quantify the data, right? Like, one of the unique things in our product or our tool that I added into the product was I wanted to make sure that school scores were in the product, right? And I remember like our CTO kind of going like, why school scores? Like, what does that have to do with anything? And I go, there is a direct relationship between school scores and vacancy rates in an area. Direct relationship. Meaning that like the higher the school scores, the less risk you're going to take on a vacancy in that area. I didn't make it up, right? That's data. That's quantifiable data that can tell you like, hey, I'm mitigating some risk by buying in an area with a better school score, right? Jobs. Most recently, one of the unique things that we added was how many Airbnbs are in a given market center, right? It can be good, bad. It could be, just knowing the information is great. Cause like in some areas like Scottsdale, right now, what we saw is a lot of those neighborhoods that were heavy Airbnb, a lot of those properties went on the market together all at the same time, kind of all went out there to the market, and they suffered as a result of that, right? But if you knew that going into it, you might go, yeah, there is some activity and there's not a ton. So like, that's good for me because I can get, I'm going to have a captive audience. But if you get into a highly saturated Airbnb neighborhood, it can get a little dangerous, right? That can be a little dicey too. So all of those things matter, the demos, the jobs, the distance to certain things, that's another one that like we've like to add in there now is like distance to grocery stores, distance to
Public transportation.
right. And like, distance to Starbucks,
Yeah, it matters.
like all of those things are important to tenants. Right. And that it's the reason that they would move out of a property, they'd be like, no, it just takes me too long to get to the grocery store. It takes me too long to get to work. I want to go watch a game and I'm like too far from the stadium, stuff like that.
And I'll pay for that. By the way, I'm renting now since I moved back to Scottsdale. And it's something we talk about all the time is how awesome my area is. I don't have to get on the highway for anything. Like that's important to me. I can go to Target, I can go to Walmart, I can go to any store that I want. Maybe one I missed, but I have fine dining. So I'm willing to pay a premium on the right location as well. So that's fantastic. To wrap this segment up, let's just talk a little bit. So again, this keeps coming back regardless of fix or flip, regardless of long-term, regardless of what your strategy is. Data is important. That's probably the most important thing that I take away from my learnings from you is put data behind, take emotion out. Right. It's okay to have emotion, right, behind this purchase because, by the way, this is the most emotional purchase you're going to do.
Right.
But put data to help mitigate the risk.
Yeah.
So to that point, is there a perfect time to flip? Is there a perfect time to do both? Is there a perfect timing? So basically, when do I flip?
Yeah.
When do I move to long term?
Both. I think that if your plan is to create long term wealth, right, then there's like ways you can get there. Either you've got to have some money out sitting on the sidelines to go invest in these long term rentals,
right,
and then continue to invest in those long term rentals, which can be hard for people. A lot of people will use flipping as a strategy to get into long-term buy and hold. It's like the
end game is
catalyst.
this, but I want to start here because it's
they got to make some additional passive. They got to make some capital first, not passive in the flip sense, but they're not in their day job, right? They're not going to make, and they're not going to get a $30,000 pay raise for a month of work. Like that's not going to happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? But whereas if they flip a house, you can make that kind of money on the side and then use that $30,000 to go invest into your long-term rental. Right. And that becomes awesome. I think in a couple of weeks, we've got, JP coming from Vantage IRAs, and we're going to talk about using self-directed IRAs in real estate investment. I think that people forget where their money is. Like they just don't understand how to tap into some of their monies. And self-directed IRA, he'll know how many trillions of dollars are tied up in people's IRAs, but there's more money in retirement accounts than anywhere in the country. It's like a massive number. And people don't think that they can tap into it, but they can, right? And you could tap into that money and make exponentially more money with it with some real estate investment, and it's an awesome vehicle.
Yeah.
And, so I'm looking forward to that conversation. Flipping in a depreciating market can be difficult. Flipping in a market that the home values are going down can be tough.
Yeah.
That can be tough. It can be done. You just got to be able to buy the property right. And you've got to have the foresight to know what that property is going to sell for on the other side of it. Because people still want nice stuff. They don't, nobody really wants to live in the fall down house,
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's always a market for a nice remodeled property, but it's got to be priced right. It's got to be priced appropriately for the market. So, flipping in a market that could be declining can be a little bit dicey, and so just be careful there. Have some data, have some foresight, look forward, all of those things. But the long-term buy and hold, I think is cool. And I, like I told you earlier, I like the model of the both, right? I like having the flexibility. And even when I had my own fund, the way the fund was structured is that, we didn't make a decision on strategy until the asset came in. So the asset came first, and then we decided what its highest and best use was. And then we made a decision on which option to go with, which strategy to go with. And that was the best fund that I found out there, because I was no longer restricted by like, well, I'm just in a rental fund and this is all that I do. Property comes in first. We make a decision whether we flip it or we hold it. And we did a mixed bag of all of them, and it worked out great.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Doors. We hope you found today's insights valuable for your real estate investing journey.
Remember, real estate success doesn't happen overnight, but with the right tools and strategies, you can build long-term wealth and create passive income.
If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with others who are passionate about real estate investing.
Don't forget to follow us on social media for more tips and exclusive content.
Until next time, keep unlocking new opportunities, and we'll see you on the next episode of Behind the Doors.